They told us it was water, waves, and bad timing. That Malcolm Jamal Warner, beloved actor, activist, and truth-teller, simply slipped beneath the tide, swallowed by a cruel ocean on a random day that ended everything too soon. But now, months later, the illusion has shattered into a million blood-stained fragments because his wife, silent, grieving, hunted, has finally broken down the gates of silence and screamed the truth the world wasn't ready for. Malcolm didn't drown, Malcolm didn't slip, Malcolm didn't fall. He was poisoned, he was hunted. He was executed in a chilling orchestration of silence by powerful figures who feared his voice more than any storm. And what unfolds now is not grief, not mourning, but a volcanic uprising of justice, vengeance, and the revelation of a cover-up so monstrous, so calculated, that it threatens to rip apart the glamorous facade of Hollywood and expose the rotting core festering beneath red carpets and studio deals. Because this wasn't just a death, it was a silencing, a strategic erasure of a man who dared to speak, to lift the veil on a billion-dollar lie. And his wife, heartbroken but unbowed, is the earthquake tearing through the lie, telling the world that the man she kissed goodbye on a warm afternoon never came back, not because he was careless, but because someone made sure he wouldn't, because Malcolm, cautious to a fault, a strong swimmer, a lover of life and protector of truth, had already confided in her that he was being followed, that he was receiving anonymous threats, warning him to shut up or be shut down. And that's why he fled to Costa Rica, to breathe, to plan, to protect his work. But they followed him even there. And now she stands before the world, not just as a widow, but as a warrior holding the bloodied remnants of the man she loved, a man whose lungs had no water, whose body bore no signs of struggle, but whose veins carried a rare chemical compound capable of paralyzing and silencing without a trace. And the only trace they left was the unbearable void in her arms and a USB drive he left behind, a digital time bomb filled with notes, audio, videos, proof that he knew, that he saw, that he was ready to expose a list of names that reached into boardrooms, Oscar stages, political fundraisers, a list so explosive that the night he was killed, the document disappeared, his phone was wiped, his cloud storage was erased, and his laptop was found smashed beneath a pile of sand. But not before his wife remembered his words. If anything happens to me, this is why. And now, even in death, his voice refuses to be quiet, because she found the messages, the threats, the recordings, and she's already named one of the men Malcolm feared most. Marcus Denton, a disgraced ex-manager with deep pockets, deeper connections, and a vendetta, after losing millions in a lawsuit with Malcolm, a man whose name appeared over and over again in Malcolm's handwritten journal. And when she tracked him to a Miami bar and threw the USB on his table with trembling fury and said, "I know what you did," his face turned to ash, his drink spilled, and he ran, not walked out the back door, confirming everything she feared. And when she turned that footage over to a once blacklisted journalist who had herself been silenced for exposing Hollywood predators, the story ignited the internet like dry brush in lightning. Tens of millions of views, celebrities breaking their silence. Hashtags like "Justice for Malcolm" and "Justice he didn't drown" trending worldwide, while the autopsy was suddenly revised by a new coroner, replacing the first who had noted suspicious toxicology findings. And just like that, the official record tried to stamp out the truth again, calling it accidental drowning, despite the bruises on his ribs, the missing electronics, and the terrified assistant who came forward in a voice-modulated interview confessing that Denton had boasted about silencing Malcolm and joked that drowning was poetic. And now Malcolm's widow, worn but relentless, has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Denton and the production company Malcolm was investigating, alleging a coordinated effort to shut down his final podcast, a series that pulled back the velvet curtain on institutional abuse, hush money, NDAs, and power players who saw young black actors not as talent but as disposable commodities. And she has gone to Congress, testified on national television, and risked her life because her car has been vandalized, her cameras wiped, her home circled by unmarked vans. And just days ago, she received an envelope with no return address and the words, "You've said enough," scrawled in red. But her reply was a public post. "You took my husband. What else can you take?" And now, the public is rising behind her. A movement surging across every platform, demanding the full release of the final podcast episode Malcolm recorded but never uploaded. A recording said to contain 3 names, and just when the world thought the storm had reached its peak, just when Malcolm Jamal Warner's widow had finally unearthed enough to awaken the conscience of a silenced industry, the second wave hit with the force of a tidal reckoning, because part 2 of this unfolding nightmare didn't open in a courtroom or on a talk show stage, but in a locked storage unit buried beneath the freeway on the outskirts of Atlanta, where a rusted key Malcolm had once hidden inside the spine of a Bible led his widow, now part detective, part martyr, part symbol of truth, to a hidden archive of everything the killers thought they had erased. Backup hard drives, voice memos, signed affidavits, transcripts of blackmail, surveillance footage showing Malcolm being followed from the studio to his home to the airport on the day he left for Costa Rica, and at the center of it all, a sealed envelope addressed in Malcolm's own handwriting that simply read, "Only if I'm gone." And when she opened it, the truth roared like a wildfire. Names, payments, wire transfers, screenshots of private chats between top-tier Hollywood executives discussing Malcolm's podcast in coded language, calling it the leak machine, and one bone-chilling message from an unknown number that read, "He's 2 uploads away from ruining everything. Shut it down, or we're next." And it became clear that this wasn't just about Malcolm, wasn't just about one actor with a conscience. It was about a massive machine of silence, about every victim who was ever told to smile and keep quiet, and Malcolm in death had become the spark that threatened to detonate it all, because buried in those files was a recorded meeting, dated 6 days before his death, between 3 executives from a media conglomerate known for grooming young talent and burying lawsuits with hush money, where they said, word for word, "We can't afford another Cosby situation. Warner's too clean, too smart. Either we cut the mic or we cut him loose." And that phrase, "cut him loose," would later echo across social media like a death knell as the file leaked online, crashing websites, triggering protests, and pulling back the final curtain on a decades-long web of intimidation and institutional violence against black voices in entertainment. But it was what happened next that brought the nation to its knees, because in a live-streamed press conference outside the Los Angeles courthouse, where the wrongful death suit had just been filed, Malcolm's widow, surrounded by armed security, civil rights leaders, and weeping fans, announced that she had not only the names, but the proof. And then she did what everyone feared and everyone prayed for. She played the last 10 minutes of Malcolm's final podcast, a segment never meant for public ears, a posthumous audio will of a man who knew the hourglass had run dry. And in it, his voice was calm, resolute. "If this is airing, I'm gone. But please understand, this is not about vengeance. This is about stopping them from doing this to someone else. There's a file, Omega Sunrise. But if that gets out, they can't hide anymore. They can't kill every truth." And instantly the phrase, "Breacher Omega Sunrise," became the #1 global trend as hackers, journalists, fans, and whistleblowers worked to uncover the rest. And then it happened. A masked digital activist dropped the full Omega Sunrise dossier online, 736 pages of contracts, gag orders, sexual misconduct settlements, psychiatric silencing orders, and internal communications between legal departments coordinating the cover-ups. And as media outlets scrambled to verify, the silence was broken again. This time by Malcolm's former co-stars, producers, and even a few A-list allies who had once stayed neutral but could no longer stomach the weight of complicity. And they came forward with stories, emails, footage, and suddenly the dam burst. Stories of hidden rehab stints forced on whistleblowers, payoffs to families, anonymous donations to victims who signed away their rights forever. And at the epicenter of the scandal was the studio Malcolm had named in his notes, now facing a massive federal probe as subpoenas flew and high-level resignations rolled in like thunder. And Malcolm's widow, though exhausted, stood unshaken because while her home was now under 24-hour surveillance, while her daughter wore a bulletproof backpack to school, and while her own sister had been sent a warning email saying, "Your bloodline isn't safe," she refused to retreat and instead dropped the next bombshell. A video from Malcolm's laptop of a secret meeting between a well-known morning show host and a media executive whispering about neutralizing Malcolm before the documentary aired. And now the scandal had crept into every television, every dinner table, every office hallway, because if even a fraction of it was true, and the documents made it impossible to deny, then the entire entertainment ecosystem was built on fear, a court date, but with a hacked email leak so volatile, so incriminating, that it sent agents, reporters, and death squads alike scrambling to do damage control. And at the epicenter of the explosion was a 94-page document dubbed Project Recalibrate, a strategic dossier mapping out a systemic campaign of character assassination, digital surveillance, and psychological warfare, not just against Malcolm, but against a dozen other public figures who had once expressed interest in whistleblowing or collaborating on his now infamous podcast series. And as the widow scanned the file in shock, her hands shaking, eyes raw from a sleepless month of interviews and courtrooms, one name stood out: a former friend, a co-star, someone Malcolm once trusted like a brother, revealed in an intercepted text exchange to have been compromised, flipped, used as bait to lure Malcolm to that beach in Costa Rica with promises of a safe meeting. A betrayal so vile that when the widow confronted him through her lawyers, he broke down and confessed in writing, "They had my family. They knew about my debt. I didn't know they'd kill him. I thought they just wanted leverage." And that revelation detonated across the internet like a second death, shattering illusions, unraveling friendships, and proving once and for all that Malcolm was not paranoid. He was being hunted by a coalition of legal, corporate, and criminal forces that had coalesced to protect a rotting empire with too many skeletons to count. And if Part 2 revealed the shadow, Part 3 dragged it into daylight, because in an emergency press conference, streamed live to over 200 million viewers, Malcolm's widow released 3 explosive audio clips, the first a recorded phone call between Malcolm and an anonymous insider known only as T, who begged him to stop pursuing the podcast and said, trembling, "They did the same thing to 3 others, 2 suicides, 1 disappeared in Belize. You think you're special? You're next." The second, a voice memo from Malcolm just hours before his death, whispering, "I see them outside again. I'm not scared. I just want this message to make it to you. If they get me, don't let them rewrite my story." And the third, a security cam audio enhancement from the night Malcolm vanished, muffled voices, scuffling, and a man screaming, "He's not breathing! Get him in the water now!" A recording that law enforcement initially deemed inadmissible until a new special prosecutor took over the case and declared it credible, chilling, and criminal, reopening the death file as a federal homicide investigation and issuing subpoenas to every executive named in Omega Sunrise, triggering mass panic as multiple executives resigned. One attempted to flee via private yacht before being arrested in international waters, and another was placed under psychiatric hold after attempting suicide in a Beverly Hills hotel. But none of that stopped the widow, who now had something even more dangerous than evidence: momentum. And when she announced her intent to testify before the United Nations on global corruption in media systems, international attention reignited the firestorm, prompting reporters to dig into similar accidental drownings of young black artists over the past decade, unearthing patterns, shared lawyers, repeat security firms, names now appearing in Malcolm's files going back years, names he had written in a notebook titled Gods in Suits. And in one of the most haunting revelations of the saga, the widow found a final unplayed video on Malcolm's old DSLR camera, shot the night before his death. Sitting on the porch, voice raspy, eyes tired, he looked directly into the lens and said, "I know you're watching. You can kill me, but you won't kill the truth. You can poison my blood, but not the message. And when she finds this, when my wife plays this, know that the storm has arrived." And play it she did, on every platform, screen and street corner she could, turning grief